you looking to sharpen your budgeting skills? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast, where we talk about life, family, and how to afford it. And now, the Budget Couple themselves, Nate and Danielle.
Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast. I'm Nate.
And I'm Danielle.
And this week, we're going to talk about some listener emails that we received, along with a couple other things that we've come up over the past couple weeks here. But before we dive into that, I really want to ask you, if you could, please leave us a review on your podcast player of choice, Apple, iTunes, or whatever you happen to listen on. It really helps us grow the show and to get more viewers, and it also helps us go through and be able to answer more questions.
To start us off, I'm going to read a couple lines from one of the emails we received recently. We recently paid off credit card debt from the help of family as it was sinking us. While our income was good, credit card debt accumulated and put us in a financially scary place. Probably a pretty common thing to hear. I think this has happened to quite a few people. So it's not that it's a strange situation, and it's good to be at the point where you're acknowledging it and you're thinking about it and you're trying to figure out how to address it. So this particular listener really wanted to hear a little bit more about how we deal with credit cards, particularly when they're trying to readjust their budget, remake their budget, and really stay on track as they're also tackling a bunch of student loan debt as well as other debt. So they wanted to have a little bit more of an explanation about our use of credit cards. We each have a main credit card. We each have one in our own name. It's not because we don't want to combine them. It's more just because we're lazy and this is what we're used to. We've had those two credit cards for probably over a decade for me, at least.
Yeah, I think I've had mine for 15 years, and I'm absolutely lazy when it comes to trying to join. There's no reason, really.
Exactly. So we have all of our finances completely combined. We just have two separate credit cards out of laziness and convenience, basically.
Yep,
so just to clarify that, that's why we have those two, for no other reason, really. And we use those credit cards for literally everything, not just fun money, not just our own budget, personal budgets, but for everything.
Yeah, I think the only time we don't use our credit cards are on places that require cash. Like there's an ice cream store in town that we love going to, but they only accept cash. So we use cash for that place, but pretty much nowhere else. And then we have a debit card for paying off our credit cards and paying for any bills that can't be paid by credit card, like our car loan, our mortgage, things like that, where they have to be hooked up to a checking account in some way, shape, or form.
So this really works for us because we don't have an issue with overspending because we have, say, a $5,000 limit or something. We don't really even think about our limits because we never reach them. We know our budget. We have that set in stone. So at the beginning of each month, we know exactly what we're going to be spending because we have that mapped out. Even for those variable expenses, like we talked about a episode or two ago.
Yeah.
We have a set amount. So, Nate gets $200 to spend a month. I get $200 to spend a month. So those expenses, as we're buying stuff throughout the month, that's going on our credit cards, but it's also being recorded on our budget. So we always know how much we're spending. And when we reach that $200 limit, we stop, or theoretically, we stop.
Danielle usually stops. I sometimes go a little over.
But that's the idea, that we have that budget. We know what's going to be in that credit card at the end of every month.
Right. And that credit card, again, is not just for the $200 that we have of fun money. That goes for our going out budget. It goes for our random expenses. It goes for our grocery. It goes for gas. It pretty much goes for everything that cannot be paid or we don't want to pay with a debit card. So the things that require a debit card we use, but everything else, and I mean legitimately pretty much everything else, is paid with credit card. So it's not just for our personal budgets of the fun money for each month. We use it for everything.
One thing that a lot of people do I don't know about a lot of people, but I have heard that some people use cash, basically. So this is kind of our way of using cash, I guess. But some people will literally just take out the amount of cash they want to spend for each section of their budget each month, and they'll have that set aside in, say, an envelope or something, and they'll only use that cash. And that gives them a way to say, okay, when the cash runs out, I'm done spending. I can't spend anymore in that category for that month. So for some people who are, maybe have trouble with credit cards or have trouble keeping their spending under control, maybe that's a good way to do it, or perhaps a good way to at least start. But for us, I feel like we have a good enough handle on the budget and our spending that we like to use credit cards. It just helps us keep track of where the money's going better. I know, I think we've said it before, but Nate, if he has cash in his wallet, it just disappears.
Oh, absolutely. A credit card gives accountability to me because I can go back and look and see what I spent, and I can write in purchases that I forgot, because very often I buy something and I forget to mark it down in our budget. And then when the bill comes due, it's higher than what we planned on because I didn't write things down. So if I had cash, the only real record that would come from that is a receipt. And that's assuming that I keep my receipts, which I don't, and that I would remember to put them in my budget, which I wouldn't. And it would just cause more problems. So for a lot of people, cash is a good thing because it really helps you hone in stuff. And there's some talk of psychological kind of things where giving money over hurts. That's not how I am. It doesn't hurt me. It just doesn't work for me. Having a credit card where I know I only can spend so much, and if I go over, Danielle will open up my statement and find out exactly where I spent it. That is the real accountability piece for me, and that really helps me a lot.
The one thing I really like about credit cards too, not only the accountability, but you do get reward points on them. Maybe it's not really significant, but we put everything. We even put our Verizon bill on it. So it's like it adds up pretty quickly, actually, and it's nice to have those reward points every so often. So for us, it's just another perk, and we really haven't been hurt by using credit cards.
Right. But one thing that's important to note here is we use credit cards like cash. So if we don't have that money available to us, we don't buy it. We know how much money is available to us at any one time. So if there's something that goes on to a credit card that we can't afford, it doesn't get purchased by us. And I think that's one of the things with credit cards where people can get in trouble very quickly, because you theoretically have thousands of dollars that aren't really yours, but you can spend them and you can pay the credit card company back. That's okay, I guess, but what you really want to focus on is making sure you're not spending money that you don't have. And that's why we treat credit cards like cash, and it's worked out pretty well for us.
So just to wrap that up, I would say the big takeaway is that our credit card bills at the end of each month are not a surprise to us. We basically know what they're going to be. We know what's going to be on them. We've already taken into account and recorded them on our budget. So we know at the end of the month that we will have the money to pay them off. We'll have the money to pay the rest of our bills, and we'll have the money to put towards extra debt, say our house or whatever. So that's the way that we use credit cards, but it's not the only way.
Right. And if credit cards are a problem for you, and I could see myself having a problem with credit cards at some point if I wasn't as accountable and we didn't have a budget, I think I would have a problem with it. But because we write everything down, it's a lot easier to keep track of. But if you're not in that boat where you're really having trouble being accountable with that stuff, use a debit card. A debit card is tied directly to your checking account. You can't spend more than what's in there. So you have a way of being accountable and keeping things there. The only reason we really use credit cards is because it allows us to make purchases a little bit beyond what we would need to, and it gives us kind of an endpoint for each month of when all of the bills are due, as opposed to spreading them out over the course of the month. It's just a little bit easier for us to track.
So we're going to move on to the next question that we got, and this one is actually about tracking due dates for bills. So it kind of falls in line with that what you're going to spend each month and knowing, when that's going to take place.
So the real question is, how do I track due dates? How do I track the due dates for my bills? Because I don't really remember when they're coming up. How do I get them set up? And how do I kind of make sure I budget for things that are due throughout the month? There's a number of different things you can do, and we've discussed some of them previously. But what we're also looking at possibly is looking at some apps that might be able to do this. And we're going to talk about apps in just a little bit on a different subject. But there are apps, if you're a smartphone user or even use your calendar on like a computer, you can set things up to do that.
So tracking due dates for bills, they can be all over the place. You can have one that's due on the 15th. You can have one that's due on the 31st, one on the 1st, whatever. They tend to be kind of spread out. You also have a lot of them, especially now as we have more and more subscription type services. You have Netflix and Amazon and Hulu. So there's a billion and one due dates to remember. And we feel you. What we've done is basically we just pay everything at the end of each month, or you could, I guess, say the beginning of each month. We kind of set up our budget at the beginning of the month for that month that's coming up. And then we pay everything at the end when it's all done. So for some of these, this means that we pay our bill slightly early. And for others, it means we pay it closer to the due date. Now, of course, we pay everything on time because we're still paying everything once a month. It's just that we we choose one time in the month to pay all of the bills.
Yeah, it makes things a lot easier for us to keep track of everything, to just sit down one day a month and kind of go over all our finances. If you set up things so you can pay them all on a day or two within each other, it really just makes it easy for you to see exactly what money's going out, where it's going, and really gives you a chance to recenter yourselves and to get ready for the next month.
One other thing that you might think about doing, it's a little more annoying, but calling some of your companies or maybe going online and doing it and actually changing your due date. You can actually do that. You can go in and say, I'd rather have a first of the month due date for all of my bills. You can actually go through and change that. It just takes little time and it might be a little annoying, but if that would help you in your organizing of paying off bills and managing your finances, it might be worth it.
Now, a lot of people struggle because you generally get paid every 2 weeks. And if your bill's due on one of those off weeks, how do you afford that? And that's really where the budgeting comes down to everything, is that you need to make sure you have enough money in your accounts to budget and plan for those expenses, because your bill due dates should not be a surprise to you. They should be known and be budgeted for. It takes a little while to get there if you're just starting out, especially if you're brand new to the budgeting concept. It takes a little time to get enough money set up so that you can go through and not have to worry about that. But as soon as you get to that step, the rest of budgeting gets a lot more easy as far as that goes, because you know you have the money there, you know you can pay it, and the stress of affording things is immediately off the table.
Speaking of budgets, we had gotten a question previously about some of the apps out there around budgeting. And, as you know, we use a spreadsheet. We don't use an app. We're pretty...
Because we're nerds.
Low technology, but kind of high technology, actually, because we feel it gives us a lot of flexibility. But we did say that we were going to maybe use some of these apps and review them. So we started off this first month by trying out EveryDollar. So both Nate and I downloaded EveryDollar onto our phones. And you can share an account, so you guys can both have, so if you're, with your significant other, spouse, whatever, you can actually share an account on EveryDollar.
Yeah, you just need to make sure you sign in with the same email address and password, and then your accounts are synced up theoretically.
Pretty simple. So it's fairly user-friendly from our experience. Basically, the main premise of it is that you want a $0 budget. So you tell the app how much your monthly income is after, so what your paycheck is after all of the taxes, after all of the health insurance, everything. So what are you getting in your paycheck every single month? So you put that in there. And then you have to add a whole bunch of categories, whichever ones work for you. And it's fairly flexible in coming up with your own, though they do have some default ones in there as well. But you put in all of your categories and you fill them up until the point that you have an amount that equals your income, essentially. So your income minus your expenses should be equal to zero, theoretically. And that's how this whole app is basically built.
So when you open up the app, up at the top, it gives you a couple of options as far as your planned expenses, what you've spent, and what you have remaining. So you can kind of very quickly see how much money's coming in, how much of it you spent, and how much you have left, which is really nice. It's a very quick, easy way to see how you're allocating your money. Underneath that, it gives you an idea of kind of where you're splitting up that money, and you can see where the income's coming from. And then there's a favorites area where you can set favorite categories, which we used a lot, we found, because there's a lot of categories we have in our budget. I think there was 18 or 20 something at last check. So there was a lot. And scrolling through all that to find the one particular one was just a non-starter for us. So we favorited a couple of categories like our personal budgets, baby boys budgets, and going out, so we could quickly be able to access those, add on the expense, and be ready to move on to the next thing.
So that's what you do to add on expense. You just literally click on the category and it opens up to a page that shows you how much you have planned for that category and how much you've spent, and then what's remaining. And you can just literally click on a little add button and add an expense. It's a little more extensive than what we would probably use. It asks for the date, the amount of what you spent, the merchant, and allows you a couple other items like check number and such if that works for you. Typically, we just put the amount, and in merchant, I just put what it is, maybe lunch or something like that. So I don't go into too much detail. I just throw it in there. But that worked pretty well, pretty much similar to what we use with our spreadsheets when we just write in an expense in there. Some of the categories are giving, savings, housing, transportation, lifestyle. And then they break down further even more and give you a bunch of different options. So it's pretty extensive in the categories. I didn't actually have to add too many, I don't think.
No, there's most of them were there by default, which was nice because you can get up and running very quickly.
It allows you to change them month by month. So this is actually like you click on November and you do November's budget, or you click on December and do December. So it can change slightly month to month. It allows that flexibility if your income or your expenses are variable at all.
And I can see why people really dig this app. It has outstanding reviews on the Apple App Store. We listen to Dave Ramsey occasionally, and he's always talking about this. This is his app. If you've ever heard that name, he's pretty big in the personal finance field. I don't know if this one's for us. And I say that kind of sad because I really like this app. I think it's a good app. I think it's just a little more than what we really need. We don't need to have all of the categories set out the way this has, and we don't really need to review our budget each month the way that this wants you to. I think the biggest thing that we have, and this can be fixed, is that it's set up as a $0 budget or a zero balance budget. And we don't set our budget up that way. We take whatever money we have remaining and put it onto items that we need to. Now, you could set up a miscellaneous area where you put that extra money so you do have the zero budget. It just kind of gets a little wonky when you need to change things often.
So, I mean, actually, I kind of disagree because I think it is set up for that, though. And in essence, our budget is also a $0 budget. We're just, whatever we have left over is put towards debt. And the Every Dollar app has a debt category. So that's where we included it. I have literally wrote in a category that says extra house. And so that's that extra money after I put all the other categories in first, and whatever I had left over, I just added that in, and that's our extra money that we put into the house. So there is a way to do it. We are creatures of habit, and we do like the flexibility that spreadsheets give you. Just in that you really can do anything with a spreadsheet. You can write in anything, you can put in any equation, do whatever you want. I'm also not a huge smartphone user. I tend to like computers and just the flexibility of being able to pull the spreadsheet up when I'm on the computer. So, maybe we don't have any great reasons not to use this app.
No, there's really nothing wrong with the app. The only issue I think that we ran into was towards the beginning when we were both signed into the account and tried to make changes. It wasn't syncing from one phone to the other. So one phone showed us that we had this much money coming in. Another one showed that we have a different amount of money coming in. So they weren't syncing, and that could cause a problem. Whereas we've never had that issue with our Google Sheets that we use for our budget. They always sync no matter what.
To be fair, it did sync. It just took some time. It took a few hours for a change that I made to be reflected on Nate's phone.
And I'm not a patient person.
So I mean, there could be some issue if you guys are both spending money at a similar time or something, but it does sync eventually. It's just takes a little bit of time, that's all.
And the only other thing I have to say about this is for what we use our budget for and how we use our budget, I actually found this took us a little bit more time to put expenses in than what our Google Sheets does. This Google Sheet, I can just pull up the Sheets app, I go in and type the number in real quick, and I can exit out, and this saves, or the changes are already saved, it's ready to go. Whereas this one required a few more button presses to get where I wanted to go. Again, I'm a complete creature of habit. I will 100% admit that. So this is a great app. It's just not one that I found myself wanting to use often. I found myself always wanting to go back to the old version, which I think is true. A lot of people, change is hard. And for how we use our budget, I don't think this change is entirely necessary.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate one more time here.
Come on.
And I just realized as I'm sitting here looking at the app, and I went into December's budget to see what would happen if we created a new budget for December. It automatically actually copies over everything you had from the previous month.
Okay.
So that makes things a heck of a lot easier. Then you can just go back and change some slight numbers to reflect whatever's changed for your next month. So that actually makes it a lot more usable. I didn't know that you were able to do that.
Fantastic. And again, there's really nothing wrong with this app. If this is how you budget, awesome. I think we just like the flexibility of being able to set up stuff the exact way we want and being able to use it on pretty much any device, whether it be a computer, tablet, or phone. We have availability to our budget instantly. We're not just tied to the phone.
So over the next few months, we'll be trying out a couple other apps here and there, and we'll be, seeing what we think of them, if they're better, worse, what some of the, challenges are with them. And we'll report back, of course. If you guys have any other questions or ideas around the apps, we did get a question, by the way, about any apps out there specifically for tracking bills. So we are going to look into that a little bit as well. Usually that's kind of wrapped up into these budget apps, but there probably is some stuff out there specifically for that. So we'll look into that as well.
Yeah, the next apps that we're going to be taking a look at, and this was going to be next month, we're going to be looking at Mint. And then the month after that, we're going to be taking a look at You Need a Budget. And we're just going to kind of see what we like, dislike, and how we use these apps to get everything set up. But I think that's all we have for this episode. You can always go to budgetcouple.com/episode 18 for show notes and anything else you need to talk about with this episode. Or you can go to budgetcouple.com and click on that contact form if you have any questions for us. We love to answer questions, and we actually are starting to run out of things that we want to answer on the air. So if you have questions for us, please let us know. We'd be happy to answer them.
We look forward to hearing you guys. See you next time.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Budget Couple Podcast with your hosts, Nate and Danielle. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit budgetcouple.com. Make sure to check out the next episode of the Budget Couple Podcast, where we'll talk more about life, family, and how to afford it. We'll catch you next time.